How's it going, YouTube? Welcome to another Shortcast podcast where I just talk about something off the cuff for a little bit. Today, we're going to be talking about the reaction to Budokai Tenkaichi 4. What does it mean? What exactly is Budokai Tenkaichi 4? And where do we go from here? So first off, I want to start off by saying there's no script. I've got no outline for this video. We're just going to be going and having fun with it. So, first, I want to talk about the reaction to Budokai Tenkaichi 4. Nobody was expecting it to be announced. It was kind of always like a dream. Like it was just nothing you expect. It's kind of like expecting there to be a Raging Blast 3. I don't think they made a Raging Blast 3, right? Or a Xenoverse 3, even. Which, I mean, that's kind of possible, but they've dropped so much DLC for Xenoverse 2, they'll probably never do Xenoverse 3. But, honestly, who's asking for Xenoverse 3 now, you know? I was kind of in that camp where I was like, where's Xenoverse 3? Because it was like, that is our main 3D Dragon Ball fighter, and I need another 3D Dragon Ball fighter, so give me Xenoverse 3. I like Kakarot because it's the story RPG Dragon Ball game that we got going on, and it's getting some cool DLC. I'm super excited for the new DLC coming. And I completely forgot to mention this, but my Bardock DLC, I played it, I recorded it all, I just haven't uploaded it yet. But back to Budokai Tenkaichi 4. Also, Fighters. We got Fighters or Fighter Z. I'm pretty sure when they announced it, they told people to call it Fighter Z, and everybody still just called it Fighters. But, yeah, so nobody was expecting Budokai Tenkaichi 4. It gets announced. The internet goes wild. Every Dragon Ball fan worth their merit was freaking out. I did see some interesting reactions, though. Like, I saw some people online saying that they had never played the original Budokai Tenkaichi games whenever they were younger. And I was like, dang, I guess I am kind of getting old, aren't I? I mean, I'm only 23, but that is relatively old when you compare it to other people that are, like, new Dragon Ball fans. Because I remember when Dragon Ball Super was coming out, and people were watching it, and I was like, holy crap, you started with Dragon Ball Super? And they were like 15, 14, whatever. And, of course, I think I was around that age whenever Dragon Ball Super came out. But, of course, I had grown up with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball GT. I already knew my way around the Dragon Ball world. So whenever I watched Dragon Ball Super, I was like, yeah, I know all these characters. I know what's going on. It doesn't quite live up to the legacy of Dragon Ball Z, but it's still pretty good. And that's kind of what's going on with Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 4, which we don't even know what the title is yet. It's got 4 at the end, but it could, like, there was this leak that the code name is Budokai Tenkaichi 0, but that's just a code name. I said it in one of the shorts I uploaded that's pretty similar to what happened with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and pretty much any Dragon Ball game. A lot of games in general, they have code names before they're ready to reveal the actual name that they're going with, so... but getting back to the main topic, the reaction was crazy. It was so fun seeing all the reactions of people and what they thought of it and trying to discern, holy crap, is this Budokai Tenkaichi? It is, but are we getting an HD remaster? Or are we getting a, oh, it's a freaking sequel? And everybody was going crazy. And that was a really fun thing to experience as a Dragon Ball fan because, I mean... I get excited every time a new Dragon Ball Z game is announced. I mean, the reaction to Dragon Ball The Breakers was the most I've been disappointed in a game because I looked at the trailer. I was like, that's interesting, but not worth $20 or $60 or however much it costed. I was like, that's a free-to-play game to me, you know? And I'm pretty sure they have like a battle pass and in-game currency you can buy and everything like that. So like, yeah, to me, they should release that game free-to-play. And so that's a concern I have for Budokai Tenkaichi 4 is how much content is going to be in it on day one. Because we know from Budokai Tenkaichi 3, they have a lot to live up to. I mean, that game had so much content in terms of story and characters and gameplay. All the little items you could customize. The versus mode was fun. And they had like so many forms. They had a lot of representation from the world of Dragon Ball. We had some OG Dragon Ball characters, some GT characters, mainly Dragon Ball Z characters, which of course was fine because that was the big hit at the time. And it came out during a time where DLC wasn't the big thing, and so you were expected to, at launch, release your game complete with all the characters you planned on implementing all the story content. And, I mean, Budokai Tenkaichi 3 gave us so much great what-if content as well. And it was just a lot of fun, and it taught me the phrase "what if." I was like, wait, what if this happened, you know? Some people were taught the phrase "what if" from Marvel Comics or something like that, but I learned it from Dragon Ball. So moving into Budokai Tenkaichi 4, they do have quite the legacy to live up to. The standard was set with Budokai Tenkaichi 3. Everybody forgot about Ultimate Tenkaichi. I'm not even sure. I think what happened with that game was in Japan it wasn't even like I know in Japan I think it's called Sparking, but in Japan Ultimate Tenkaichi wasn't part of the Sparking franchise, and then when they brought it to the US they just called it Ultimate Tenkaichi to be calling it that, but I don't even know if it's part of the Sparking series. Let me check. Yeah, okay, I just checked and it is not part of the Budokai Tenkaichi series. So we're just going to ignore that rock, paper, scissors game and get back to the Budokai Tenkaichi 4 discourse. Oh, wasn't there also a Budokai Tenkaichi... there were some Budokai Tenkaichi games for PSP, right? I never played those. I never had a PSP, so I can't personally comment on those. I've seen a couple of gameplay videos of those. It looked neat. Maybe I would have played it back in the day on PSP, but it's too dated now. I got no nostalgia attached to it. I might make a one-shot video on it sometime. But yeah, Budokai Tenkaichi 4, man. Let's get into it. So we just talked about the reaction, and oh yeah, okay. So when you stop and take a minute to focus on what's going on with the world of gaming today, a lot of times when a game gets released, it's incomplete, and you're expected to buy DLC and expansion packs and pretty much complete the game with bonus content that you purchase. Now, the problem with that is that when we played Budokai Tenkaichi 3, we had all the characters at launch, and if you wanted more, you had to unlock them by playing the game. And if Xenoverse has taught me anything, it's that they will release the game and add DLC. Now, I think whenever Xenoverse released, they had mostly everybody, and then ever since then, they've just been using the DLC feature to add more and more characters. And I know in Xenoverse 1, I think they had the GT characters. It's been a while since I played Xenoverse 1 years ago. But the point is that Xenoverse, for its flaws in terms of it's still relying on DLC, it at least, I'm pretty sure, launched with a lot of the characters that you would expect in a Dragon Ball game. My concern now with Budokai Tenkaichi 4 is it has to incorporate all of Dragon Ball, all of Dragon Ball Z, all of Dragon Ball GT, and all of Dragon Ball Super. Because that's the legacy, that's the standard that Budokai Tenkaichi 3 set. I mean, I played the game so much ever since I was little, I memorized, and I got it to roll off the tongue. I know how to say Budokai Tenkaichi. I can say Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3 because that's the legacy that the game left with me, playing it all those times whenever I was younger with my cousins. And a little plug here, I am going to be having my cousin on the channel, IDoName, to speculate on Budokai Tenkaichi 4. But yeah, so whenever we're talking about the game releasing at launch, how many characters is it going to have? It should have everything in Dragon Ball Super, hopefully up until the Granola Saga, which just finished. Hopefully by then the anime will be back. That's a whole other video in itself, but yeah, it has to release with all characters. Not all characters, because like I said, I do think in today's market, you kind of do need DLC to sustain yourself and keep going, and it's fun for the community, and it keeps the game alive past its shelf life or whatever. And it's pretty, I think to me it's pretty important now, but the DLC has to be reasonable. So I think you should have pretty much all the main characters in Super up to at least the Tournament of Power. I think they need to expand on the Tournament of Power roster, because if we're doing Budokai Tenkaichi 4 and we have to have a large roster to live up to Budokai Tenkaichi 3, Then Budokai Tenkaichi 4 needs to have characters like Jiren, but also Toppo, which I think, or Top, depending on which one you want to use, which I think was in Budokai Tenkaichi 3. But you also have to use other characters that didn't get as much shine in the Tournament of Power to kind of flesh out that section of the game. Because if you're just using Ribrianne, Top, Jiren, and the other Pride Troopers and stuff, then you're kind of not providing the best experience, because part of the Tournament of Power was the Endless Gauntlet. So if you're just fighting like 5 fights and then that's the last saga of the Budokai Tenkaichi 4 game, you're kind of depriving yourself of the experience of what that saga is meant to be. Now, I thought the Tournament of Power was a little tedious, but apparently a lot of Dragon Ball fans like it. My favorite saga of Dragon Ball Super was the Goku Black saga, even though a lot of people didn't like how it ended. I thought it could have ended better, but I think the whole saga as a whole was what I actually liked way more than the Tournament of Power. But yeah, so I think they definitely should have the Battle of Gods from the beginning of Super up to the Tournament of Power at launch. And then whenever they start expanding past the Tournament of Power, I think that's where the DLC should come into play. So I think they should have Moro as DLC and Granola as DLC and Gas as DLC. Who else was from the Kai from the Moro saga? I forgot which Kai it was. It was the one that became Boo. So whenever Boo transformed, he transformed into the Kai. Because I think I'm getting a little bit mixed up in my head because I've been watching a lot of Star Wars lately. But I think Majin Buu was the one that absorbed the Kai, right? So the good Buu is pretty much Kai. That Kai. I forgot what Kai it was. The West Kai? North? I can't remember. But you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so I think that's the way the game should be built. Now, expanding beyond that, if they do want to include side characters like the Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3, at the time, I would have considered Arale a side character. I know she's like from another series that Toriyama made, and it's a big deal. And like General Blue, the original Dragon Ball characters, they're not necessarily side characters, but they're side characters in the grander tale of Dragon Ball. And I hate to say that because I love the original Dragon Ball. I think we need more original Dragon Ball content. That's why I'm super excited about the OG Dragon Ball tournament that we're getting with Piccolo Jr. in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot coming up soon. So I want more of that. So my next request for Budokai Tenkaichi 4 is to go back and tell the story of the original Dragon Ball. Now, if you want to get the big fights out of the way, you can just do Goku versus the Pilaf Gang, Goku versus Miyazaki, Goku versus Mercenary Tao, Goku versus General Blue, Goku versus Piccolo, Goku versus Piccolo. You know, you can get the big fights out of the way. Oh, and Goku versus Master Roshi and all that stuff. You know what I'm saying? Just the big fights. And so, you know, have the original Dragon Ball saga be like 6 or 7 or 8 fights or however many they want to make it. But make it at least include the original Dragon Ball to some extent. Budokai Tenkaichi 3 did to some extent. And, I mean, personally, I would prefer they flesh it out more and, like, do a, like in Budokai Tenkaichi 3, you went from fight to fight to fight. I would like if they just did every fight in the original Dragon Ball, but I know with today, and I hate to say it, but they are so bent on skipping Dragon Ball. I would feel lucky if they just, like I said, just adapted the big fights of Dragon Ball and called it a day. Then that brings us to Dragon Ball GT, a topic of hot debate. It's a very controversial. They did have, they had GT content in Budokai Tenkaichi 3, but keep in mind, back then, we thought that was the end of Dragon Ball. And, I mean, I kind of grew up with Dragon Ball GT in a weird way because I was young enough to remember watching it on Adult Swim whenever it came on. So, I can't remember how old I was, like 4, 5, 6, 3, I don't know. I just remember watching it. Not all the time, but I was lucky enough to catch it sometimes. And I liked it, and it's strangely enough, I knew the Dragon Ball Z story from DVDs and tapes and the games, but the one that I watched on TV on cable whenever I was little was GT. So I kind of have a tender spot in my heart for GT in some way. So I want to see GT content in Budokai Tenkaichi 4 as well. But it gets a little complicated. GT content is easily accessible because, GT content is easily accessible in Xenoverse because Xenoverse is all about the what-ifs and the alternate universe and the alternate timelines. So they can do the GT story. But whenever we're talking about a game that lets you play through the Dragon Ball saga from beginning to end, that GT saga doesn't necessarily fit into their plans too well. So part of me is thinking if they do want to include GT, they won't include its own saga. They'll just use GT characters as like bonus characters on the character roster, which would suck in my opinion. I think GT is a part of Dragon Ball, and I think it needs to be a part of Dragon Ball forever. I mean, it's not canon anymore, but it is still part of Dragon Ball. If you've watched my video that says the Dragon Ball episode watch order guide, the best order to watch Dragon Ball, I do think if you're getting into Dragon Ball nowadays, you don't skip GT. If you finish Z, you go to GT, then you go to Super. A lot of people nowadays want to say go to Super, then just don't watch GT, but I think you do need to include GT. And you do need to include GT in Budokai Tenkaichi 4 as well. I know it won't make the most sense to put it in the game, like setting it before or after Super. So that's why I think they might do kind of like how Budokai Tenkaichi 3 did the What If sagas. I think they might do something like that with GT in Budokai Tenkaichi 4, where it's kind of its own little subset of fights and quests or missions or however they decide to handle it. So that's how I feel about that. Now, if we want to cover a little bit more ground, we can go ahead and talk about how the story is going to play out. Budokai 3, which is not part of the Budokai Tenkaichi saga of video games, but Budokai 3 had one of my favorite story modes in the Dragon Ball games that I played growing up, other than Legacy of Goku, of course, where you could fly around on the overworld map and then go in to the actual stages and fight. And so I want to see something like that for Budokai Tenkaichi 4. Like I said, I know it's not part of the same game series, but it's still something that I would like to see implemented. I don't want to go full-on Dragon Ball Z Kakarot with the exploration and stuff, because I think if you do that, it essentially stops being the 3D fighting game that it is, and it starts being an RPG and stuff. So I don't think I want that level of exploration, but I do at least think the ability to fly around the map, go to your quests, and then go fight side fights on the map somewhere else will be fun. Kind of in a way like if you ever played Fire Emblem, where you're on the world map and you got stages or maps you want to go to fight in the story, but you can also take these alternate routes, play other quests, and just go ahead and do things that way. So while I do think that's how they should handle the story, we need to get into the other details of how they're actually going to make this game. My biggest question when this was announced was, it's been so long since Budokai Tenkaichi 3, are they just making a new Dragon Ball game and slapping the Budokai Tenkaichi name on it? Because the way Dragon Ball Budokai Tenkaichi 3 plays, you're really going to have to just adapt that straight to this new generation of games, of consoles. You can't just call it that and then change how the game works. So you're going to have to use the same camera angle. You're going to have to use the same dimensions on the models. You're going to have that same atmosphere. You know what I'm saying? Like, every menu needs to have a character talking to you, and a render of Chi-Chi giving you info in the DBZ encyclopedia. You need to be able to look at the models of all the characters, all the forms. There needs to be bios on all of them. You need to be able to go back and look at the backstory of some of that stuff. There needs to be a record hall where you can listen to all the music. There needs to be some sort of item generation gotcha minigame that does not cost real money. It just has to feel like it's part of the series without taking away from what came before, if that makes sense. Because sometimes they'll say that a game is in a certain game series, but it doesn't really feel like it is. You can tell that they just kind of designed the game to be its own thing, and then they slapped the 5 on it and just called it a day. So I think that's something that we need to consider and be cautious about going forward, and taking another closer look at Budokai Tenkaichi 4 and saying to ourselves, is this what we expected? Is this what we wanted? And that opens another conversation of fan expectations, but I do think you need to have expectations. You need to be open-minded, but you need to have expectations of it living up to Budokai Tenkaichi, the Budokai Tenkaichi name. I think I've talked about pretty much everything I want to talk about with this game. If there's anything I'm forgetting to mention, please tell me in the comments below. If you like these kind of podcast format videos where I just sit down and talk and speculate on future stuff, let me know. Otherwise, guys, stay safe, stay awesome. Like, comment, subscribe. I will see you in the next one. Peace off.